So there have been a lot of questions on the social media about the incident of Jessica. A lot of people have been asking questions, what is really going on? Is Jessica truly dead or alive? And some people are even saying that the video that have been circulating on the internet is an AI generated video. And now I've already given you a video about that, and you can check that one on this channel. Again, people have been asking, is Jessica only the person who have been doing this work? And now I'm going to show you a lot of people who have been doing this work and nothing bad happened to them. So why is that? During Jessica's time, there has been a video trending or circulating on the internet that Jessica has been killed by some of the dolphins, and I'm going to show you about 7 groups. At the end, you see Jessica over there talking, alive. Jessica is still alive. Let's enjoy this video.
The crowd came for a show but left in stunned silence. At Loro Parque, Keo, the star orca, did the unthinkable. He attacked his trainer in a split-second burst of violence. No warning, no escape. And this wasn't the first time.
It is nearly impossible to forget the horrific attack earlier this year at SeaWorld. The attack that left a trainer dead, drowned by a killer whale.
Across the globe, captive orcas have turned on their trainers in shocking, unpredictable ways. What sparks these sudden, deadly outbursts? What really happened in those final, heart-pounding moments? Dive into the haunting stories of 7 orca trainers who never saw it coming. Number 7. Alexis Martinez and Keo. For most of his life, Keo had never felt the ocean. He had never chased live prey or traveled across open waters with his pod. Instead, he was raised in captivity and trained to perform in shows. At Loro Parque in Tenerife, Keo became a star attraction, drawing crowds of tourists eager to see a killer whale up close. He had even been transferred across facilities for different performances. But by 2009, something in him began to change. That year, during preparations for the park's Christmas show, Keo was in a training pool with 29-year-old Alexis Martinez. Alexis was a seasoned trainer who had spent years working with orcas. The two were familiar with each other, and their routines had always run smoothly. But on December 24th, things took a turn for the worse. At first, Keo seemed off. He missed a few of his usual moves during training, but he floated near the surface, quiet and still. Alexis stayed with him, likely sensing something was wrong but unsure how serious it would become. One of the staff members later said he noticed something unusual. Keo appeared to deliberately place himself between Alexis and the stage platform, almost as if he didn't want him to leave. When the underwater stage signal was given and Alexis started to swim away, Keo moved in. Slowly at first, but with growing pressure. Another trainer, watching from the side, tried using control signals that had always worked in the past, but Keo didn't respond. He used the tip of his snout, known as the rostrum, to forcefully push Alexis to the bottom of the pool. The situation quickly became serious. The trainer on land switched to backup signals, hoping to regain control. For a moment, it looked like Keo was calming down. He rose to the surface and took a breath, but within seconds, he dove again, this time returning with Alexis balanced on his rostrum. His mouth was closed. Then, Keo let go, and Alexis slowly sank. Panic set in. Trainers scrambled to isolate Keo. He resisted, stalling near the gate as if he was toying with it. Only after a safety net was released into the water did he move into the adjacent pool. That gave the team just enough time to recover Alexis's body from the bottom. The injuries Alexis suffered were catastrophic. Internal bleeding, multiple organ tears, compression fractures, and bite marks covered his body. There was nothing that could be done to save him. His post-mortem confirmed that he died as a result of an orca attack. What made it worse was knowing this didn't come out of nowhere. Experts had already expressed concern about the orcas at Loro Parque. The tanks created an environment that left the whales bored, frustrated, and emotionally strained. Without a strong female to guide the social structure, things among the whales became unpredictable. Keo and the others were constantly adjusting to one another, struggling to establish dominance and routine. Boredom inside the tanks became so extreme that the orcas often tore strips off the Metflex lining used for waterproofing, just to keep themselves occupied. When animals built for speed, social bonds, and miles of ocean are kept in tight, shallow tanks, their natural instincts get distorted. The pressure builds, and eventually, something cracks. The tragedy with Keo and Alexis left behind more than grief. It exposed the strain that comes from forcing powerful marine animals into confined spaces for entertainment. These creatures are intelligent, emotional, and socially complex. When we strip them of the freedom to live as they were meant to, something breaks. And sometimes that break turns deadly. Number 6. Kasatka and Ken Peters. One of the most disturbing cases of orca aggression involved a female orca named Kasatka. The incident happened at SeaWorld San Diego on November 29, 2006. What took place during that evening show left many stunned. Trainer Ken Peters was performing a routine trick called the rocket hop, where the whale propels the trainer out of the water. But instead of completing the trick, Kasatka suddenly turned and grabbed Peters by the foot, dragging him underwater. What followed was 9 minutes of sheer terror. Kasatka pulled Peters deep below the surface, holding him down. Every now and then, she brought him up just long enough for him to gasp for air before pulling him under again. This wasn't happening behind the scenes. The crowd watched in shock, and it was all caught on camera. Eventually, Peters found a brief window of escape when Kasatka loosened her grip. Other trainers quickly reacted, stretching a net between them. That barrier helped him swim away. Kasatka still tried to follow, but Peters reached safety. He survived with a broken foot and multiple puncture wounds. It could have been far worse. What made the situation even more alarming was that this was not the first time something like this had happened. Kasatka had attacked trainers before. In fact, she had targeted Peters back in 1999. So this second incident raised serious concerns, especially since both encounters involved the same whale and the same trainer. Peters later said he didn't believe Kasatka meant to kill him. He even compared the risk to getting in a car every day, knowing accidents can happen. He explained that even while being dragged underwater, he felt like she would eventually let him go. That view, however, was not shared by everyone. Many people believed that what happened was not random. If you take a massive predator from the ocean, lock it in a tank, isolate it from its natural habitat, and force it to perform tricks for years, it might snap eventually. That is exactly what some say happened between Kasatka and Peters. Experts who reviewed the footage and analyzed the situation added another layer to the explanation. Kasatka's calf had been vocalizing from another pool during the performance. These vocal calls may have stressed her out or triggered a protective response, and this could explain her sudden aggression during the trick. Kasatka's life came to an end in 2017. She was euthanized after developing an untreatable form of pneumonia. By that time, she was around 40 to 42 years old, a long life by captive orca standards, but one marked by isolation, stress, and ultimately tragedy. This event pushed many to ask deeper questions. How much can an animal endure before it breaks? Kasatka's behavior didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of being kept in an environment that didn't meet her natural needs. No ocean, no real family group, and nowhere to escape when stress built up. Number 5. Claudia Volhart and Tikoa. In 2007, a 29-year-old trainer named Claudia Volhart came dangerously close to death during a routine training session with a killer whale named Tikoa. But before we get into what happened that day, we need to look back at Tikoa's life and what he had endured. Tikoa was born on November 8, 2000. At first, things appeared fine, but as the months passed, something began to change. His mother, Taima, started acting aggressively toward him. She raked him with her teeth, pinned him against the pool walls, and even beached him. By the following year, the situation had become too dangerous, and Tikoa was permanently separated from Taima. Another whale, Kalina, who had just given birth to a male named Tuar, took Tikoa in as a surrogate. As Tikoa grew up at SeaWorld in Orlando, he spent a lot of time with Tuar and Kalina. They were his small social group. Sometimes he also interacted with Katina and her son Ikaika, but it was Tuar he was closest to. The two young males often performed together in shows. Then on April 25, 2004, Tikoa and Tuar were loaded into a transport vehicle and flown to SeaWorld San Antonio. 2 years later, Tikoa's life changed again. He was shipped to Loro Parque in Spain, along with 3 other whales as part of a breeding loan. But this new setting was nothing like his previous homes. All 4 whales had been taken from their mothers at an early age. This disrupted their ability to form proper social bonds. When they were thrown together, the group dynamic was rocky. They fought often. Aggression became the norm. In this unstable pod, Tikoa found himself at the very bottom of the social ladder. He became the target. The others bit him, raked him, and harassed him constantly. Park staff began to worry about his condition, so they tried to send him back to SeaWorld. But SeaWorld refused. Every request to return to Koa was turned down. Even as the group settled a little over time, the violence didn't fully stop. Tekoa's body told the story. He was covered in scars from repeated attacks. Many of the rake marks were so bad that Tekoa began beaching himself, likely trying to avoid the others. Some regular visitors at the park said they could recognize him just by looking at the deep scars along his side. All this may have played a role in what happened next. Claudia Volhart had joined Loro Parque in 2003. By 2007, she had been working with Tekoa for about a year before the attack. It occurred during one of the pre-show rehearsals. Claudia and Tekoa were performing a behavior called the foot push. In this move, the trainer places their feet on the orca's rostrum, and the whale pushes them across the surface of the pool. But that day, something changed. Mid-performance, Tekoa suddenly yanked Claudia underwater. He pulled her to the bottom, then brought her back to the surface. Over and over, he repeated this terrifying act. Her colleagues rushed to help and were finally able to get her out of the water. Claudia suffered serious injuries. Her forearm was broken in 2 places. She also had damage to one of her lungs. She was rushed to the hospital and stabilized. Surprisingly, she chose to return to work after recovering. But after that incident, strict new rules were introduced. Tekoa was no longer allowed to interact with any non-senior trainer. All waterwork involving him was shut down completely. It is easy to look at the bite or the attack and call the whale dangerous, but there is always more beneath the surface. Tekoa had been passed around from park to park, removed from his family, placed into groups with other isolated whales, and subjected to daily stress and violence. His environment was not natural. It was controlled, restricted, and often brutal. When we look at Tekoa's journey, the scars on his body, and the choices made by humans around him, it becomes clear. This is not just about a whale snapping. It's about what happens when wild creatures are kept in spaces they were never meant to live in. Number 4. Annette, Ekis, and Shamu. Not every stunt goes according to plan, especially when the star performer weighs several tons and has rows of teeth designed for hunting. On April 20th, 1971, SeaWorld's public relations secretary Annette Ekis was asked to take part in a publicity stunt. The plan was simple. She would ride a killer whale named Shamu across the water while wearing a bikini. Cameras were rolling, the crowd was watching, and everything appeared to go as expected at first. For a few moments, Ekis balanced on the orca's back without issue. But just as the ride was coming to an end, something shifted. Without warning, Shamu tossed her off. Before anyone could react, the whale had clamped down on Ekis's leg and refused to let go. The peaceful atmosphere vanished. Screams filled the air as Shamu dragged her around the tank, locked tightly in his grip. Divers jumped in, armed with metal poles, trying to force the whale to release her. But there was hesitation. One wrong move, one tug too hard, and they feared the orca's powerful teeth could rip her flesh apart. It took a lot of effort, but eventually, they pried open Shamu's jaws. Ekis was rushed out of the water and immediately collapsed from shock. Bloodied, injured, and traumatized, she was quickly taken to the hospital. Her wounds were deep and severe. It required 25 stitches. She later sued SeaWorld for the incident, hoping to hold them accountable. But although a court initially ruled in her favor, the monetary compensation she received was overturned on appeal. This attack added to the growing concern over keeping massive wild animals in enclosed tanks. When an animal built for the ocean is forced to live in a limited space and interact with people for entertainment, the results can be unpredictable and sometimes violent. Number 3. Shuka attacks trainer. In 2012, a packed audience at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom witnessed something they didn't expect. A 19-year-old captive-born orca named Shuka, performing during a show, suddenly turned aggressive. At first, everything appeared routine. But then, without warning, Shuka lunged onto the stage area, her body crashing toward the trainer in a sudden burst of movement. The force of the impact lifted the trainer into the air. In a quick follow-up, she shoved the trainer into the water. The show was immediately shut down, leaving the crowd confused and concerned. This marked the first time Shuka had been filmed acting aggressively toward a trainer in front of spectators. But those who worked behind the scenes claimed this wasn't unexpected. Trainers already knew she could be unpredictable. Former orca trainer John Hargrove, who had worked closely with Shuka, recalled several troubling moments. One incident stood out to him. He had signaled Shuka to swim underneath him so he could climb onto her back. This was a move both had practiced countless times, but that day, she ignored the cue. Instead, she charged straight into him. The blow forced Hargrove underwater and slammed him hard into the acrylic wall of the tank. The crowd may have seen it as part of the show, but he knew something was off. Now, in 2000, about a year before the public attack, something important happened. Shuka lost her tank companion. A male bottlenose dolphin named Merlin was removed from her enclosure. After that, Shuka was left alone. Orcas in the wild do not live this way. They depend on constant interaction with others. The Animal Welfare Act actually requires that highly social animals like orcas should not be held alone. Yet for months, Shuka lived in complete isolation. Experts have noted that orcas who are kept alone often grow more aggressive. Some even begin showing abnormal behaviors or mental distress. What happened with Shuka isn't just a rare case of an animal acting out. It reflects what years of unnatural living conditions can lead to. Cases like this raise real concerns about the cost of captivity. When intelligent, social creatures are separated from their natural environments and deprived of essential interaction, their behavior often changes in harmful ways. The aggression we see in moments like these might not come from nowhere. It may come from years of silence, frustration, and unmet needs. Number 2. Dawn Brancho and Tilikum. She was the face of the show. Dawn Brancho wasn't just a trainer at SeaWorld Orlando, she was the one people came to see. Visitors watched in awe as she performed alongside massive killer whales, which flipped through the air with confidence and grace. To the audience, it looked like a perfect relationship between human and animal. But behind the scenes, a much darker reality was unfolding. Dawn Brancho had always dreamed of working with marine animals. She studied psychology and animal behavior in university. After graduation, she spent time working with dolphins in New Jersey. This helped her gain a much-needed experience before she landed her dream job at SeaWorld. Just 2 years in, she became a killer whale trainer. She did not just train the animals, she worked hard to stay physically fit. The demands of swimming and performing with such massive creatures required full body strength and stamina. Dawn quickly became one of SeaWorld's most recognized trainers. She was known for her passion and calm energy. Her face appeared on billboards and park advertisements, and it was often alongside the orcas she worked with. One of those orcas was Tilikum, a giant male killer whale that had been in captivity for over 3 decades. At over 12,000 pounds, he was the largest orca at the park. Dawn and Tilikum had formed a bond over the years. Those around her said she trusted him deeply and treated him with patience and care. But even she understood the risks. Years before her death, she had spoken about the dangers that come with working so closely with such powerful animals. On February 24, 2010, just after a noon show had ended, Dawn was interacting with Tilikum near the edge of the pool. Visitors at the Dean with Shamu experience were still seated nearby watching as she laid beside him with her face close to his. Without warning, he grabbed her. Some initially believed he pulled her in by her ponytail, but later reports suggested he had taken hold of her shoulder. Either way, she was suddenly underwater with a killer whale that no longer seemed willing to listen. What followed was horrific. The attack was not quick. It went on for nearly an hour. Tilikum tossed and dragged her violently. Trainers tried using nets, food, and commands to get him to release her, but nothing worked. He refused to let her go. When the staff finally managed to move him into a separate medical pool, he released her body, but by then, it was far too late. The damage done to Dawn was beyond what anyone could have expected. Her arm had been torn off, her scalp was removed. The medical examiner found broken ribs, a shattered jaw, and a severed spinal cord. The final cause of death was a combination of blunt force trauma and drowning. For 45 minutes, Tilikum had kept her lifeless body with him in the water. After the attack, Tilikum was separated from public performances. He spent most of his days isolated, often floating alone in a back pool, rarely active. He remained like this until his death in January 2017. Dawn's death wasn't the first involving Tilikum, and it wouldn't be the last time people questioned the impact of captivity on animal behavior. If someone kept you locked up for life and forced you to entertain strangers for food, your mental state would break down too. And for orcas, that breaking point can be explosive. Dawn's death, however, forced a change. SeaWorld eventually decided to end its captive breeding program for orcas, but for many, that decision came far too late. Number 1. Captive Tilikum's tragic path. Long before the tragic event that took Dawn Brancho's life, there were warnings. Warnings that came in the form of aggression, broken routines, and unexplained behaviors. But to understand things better, we first need to go back to where it all began to place thousands of miles away from the tanks of SeaWorld. In 1983, a young Tilikum was taken from the cold waters off Iceland. He was only 2 years old. Torn from his pod and placed in a concrete holding tank in Hafnarfjordur Marine Zoo, the orca had nowhere to go. For months, he remained trapped in this bare, confined space. The tank didn't give him room to swim properly, and as he grew, his ability to move freely only got worse. Then came the transfer to Sealand of the Pacific in British Columbia in 1984. At first glance, it seemed like a step up, but things quickly turned sour. Tilikum was placed in a pool with 2 older female orcas, Haida II and Nootka IV. The tank was only 26 feet wide, and tension built up fast. The 2 females didn't accept him. Instead, they bullied him constantly. They raked their teeth across his skin and left him injured. This stressful environment led to health problems, including stomach ulcers. He had to be moved to a separate medical tank to recover, but the emotional scars didn't fade. Then came February 1991. A part-time trainer named Kelty Byrne, who was also studying marine biology, slipped and fell into the orca tank. What happened next was horrifying. Witnesses say Tilikum and the 2 females swam straight toward her. She tried to get away, surfacing 3 times, reaching for help, grabbing the edge of the pool, but each time, the orcas pulled her back under. Staff threw her a life ring, but the orcas blocked her from grabbing it. To them, she seemed like an object to be controlled, tossed, and dragged around. It went on for about 10 minutes, until she was finally gone. Her body was only recovered several hours later. Steve Huxter, head of animal training at the time, admitted the whales had never behaved that way before. He said it was like they were overly stimulated. Sealand never recovered from what happened. 18 months later, it shut down. Tilikum and the other orcas were sent to SeaWorld Orlando. Many hoped the change would bring improvement, but the cycle continued. On the morning of July 1999, something strange and disturbing happened. Trainers at SeaWorld found a dead body floating in Tilikum's tank. The man was 27-year-old Daniel Dukes. The day before, he had entered the park as a regular visitor. At some point, he managed to get past security and climb into the pool. What followed was unclear. No cameras captured the incident, and no staff witnessed it. The next morning, his lifeless body was draped over Tilikum's back. SeaWorld said it was a case of trespassing. Still, many wondered why someone would sneak into an orca tank in the middle of the night, and what might have triggered Tilikum's behavior. This wasn't the first incident, and sadly, it wouldn't be the last. Despite the growing concerns, SeaWorld kept Tilikum in shows. He was still performing, still being trained, and still part of their breeding program. That continued until the afternoon he pulled Don Brancho into the water. Looking back, it becomes harder to view these attacks as isolated events. When an animal built for the ocean is trapped in small tanks, deprived of its pod, and subjected to years of physical and psychological strain, something is bound to break. Tilikum's aggression did not come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere very real. That brings us to the end of this